Okay. Afternoon, Mike. Thank you for joining us. For those listening, Mike is a professor at Lancaster University. He's the founder of Small World Consulting. He's the author of, I think, 4 books, Mike.
Yes, 4 now.
And he is currently heavily involved with the National Emergency Briefing, which is someone who takes a sort of interest at a very basic level in El Nino and surface temperature of the sea and things like that. I'm sort of quite aware that we've got some serious issues. So I think, first of all, first question is, what is the National Emergency Briefing about?
Okay. So the National Emergency Briefing originally was a briefing that we held in November last year in the Central Hall in Westminster for 1,200 of the most influential people we could pull together, including about 85 MPs, as many peers and business leaders, faith leaders, all sorts of people, celebrities, whatever. And we put them in front of 9 top experts, sort of the UK's top experts, some of the world's top experts on different aspects of the climate and nature emergency, just to lay out some bare, simple facts. And the reason we did it was because we're in a climate and nature emergency, and really the government should be briefing the UK public on this in the same way that we did for example, the COVID pandemic emergency. But they haven't done. So in the absence of that, we did it. And so the 9 briefings were, just to give a quick recap, we heard one about on the decline in nature and the UK being one of the world's most nature depleted countries. Then we heard from Professor Kevin Anderson about climate change, the bare facts on climate change, that the parts per million of carbon dioxide have suddenly risen way above the narrow band of parts per million that we've been in for the whole of the 10,000 years over which humanity has prospered and thrived. We're now miles outside of that range and rising incredibly fast. 1.5 degrees temperature range is gone. Nobody believes in that anymore. We're going to have to fight pretty hard just to stay at 2.5. That looks highly likely to be, could be catastrophic for humanity even at 2.5. And we heard that we're absolutely not on the case. And he told us that, okay, the UK talks a lot about how we're leading and how we've done good things in some areas. However, to be compatible with 2 degrees, we would need to be cutting emissions at 13%. Whereas if you look at what we've really done over since 1990, we've cut at 0.6% per year. So there's a massive need to raise the game. Next, we heard from Professor Tim Lenton from Exeter about tipping points, and most notably, the rising probability as the temperature goes up of AMOC switching off, which is a big change in ocean currents, which would affect the whole world. But specifically for the UK, it would lead to the end of crop farming. We would have long periods of the year at which we're at minus 20. We'd have long periods of the year below freezing, periods down to minus 20, and yet our summers would be hotter than they are now. So really catastrophic for the UK food production, but also globally for food production. So huge global consequences. And on top of that is the possibility of cascading tipping points where one climate symptom reinforces climate change and creates, exacerbates the effect. And, a few of these things come together. So that's tipping points. Then we heard about extreme weather events from Hayley Fowler. She told us that the weather we're experiencing in the UK is the least extreme that we are ever going to experience in any of our lifetimes. And that much of the UK infrastructure is over 100 years old and was built to withstand what was then thought to be a 1 in 1,000 year weather event. And those events are just so much more likely right now than they were then. And we're not making provision for it, and we're not ready for it. And it's going to affect, it's going to affect the UK in so many ways. So next up, after that, we heard about food supply from Professor Paul Behrens from Oxford. And he was talking about instability in the UK's food security. because we think of climate change as, it's a global issue. It affects other parts of the world. A lot of the focus of this briefing was that actually this is real and here and now for us in the UK. So our food security is nothing like as secure as we think. Extreme weather events, for example, can devastate harvests, and that would come home to roost, come home to roost anytime, right here and now for us in the UK, and we're not ready for it. The good news is the solutions are there for us. And he outlined a 4-point plan for this. The single biggest element of that plan is to change our diets, to reduce the amount of meat and dairy that we produce and that we eat. That's the single easiest thing for creating healthy, resilient, sustainable diets. All the science is pointing in that direction completely uncontentiously. There are other things to do as well, agroecology and reducing waste and so on, but that's the biggest single lever. So next up, we heard from Professor Hugh Montgomery about health impacts. And his day job in the NHS includes managing emergencies such as the 7/7 bombings response and so on. And he said, well, look, he knows what an emergency looks like, and he knows what it looks like to be taking an emergency response. And he said, it's about action. It's not about talk. He said, we're in an emergency now. We're just not treating it like one. So he said his worry for health was not what people were expecting him to focus on, which is things like heat stroke and so on. He said, my real worry is that when the economy breaks down because of the direct and indirect shocks to the system from climate breakdown, we won't have a health service, and then everybody will be dying of all sorts of things. That's his real concern. That's what scares him about it. And then next up, sorry, this is a long list of serious things, but I'll keep going. So then we heard from Lieutenant General Richard Nugee, and he said, his background is in very senior in the British Army, and he said, look, what they teach you in the army is to deal with the threat that's in front of you, not the threat as you'd like it to be. And the threat that's in front of us is a whole load of threat multipliers in the sort of global system. Things like millions of farmers under threat of finding that they can't make a living anymore. We know from history that they're very likely to go and join extreme groups, for example, and that has security implications for us right here in the UK. If there's a global food crisis, that has severe security implications for us here in the UK. So a whole load of these things coming together, and the government, not telling the British public about this. So it was a very stark message coming out from the briefings so far. And then we heard an economics briefing that was telling us that actually the good news is there's nothing not to like about the economic transition. It won't cost us that much to transition to net zero, for example. The investment will pay back extremely well. It'll all have paid back by about 2052. And we've been hearing bogus narratives about how responding to climate change will make us poorer and colder. It won't. The evidence is it will make us richer and warmer. And finally, we heard about some details from Tessa Khan about some details of the energy transition and how it's all there to be had. So that was the 9 briefings. And overall, it was a very stark picture. And I chaired the event, and I asked everybody in the room to put up their hand if they thought the messages that they'd heard were if they thought the situation was broadly as serious as they'd heard, or was even more serious, or if it had been somewhat exaggerated. And not a single hand went up to say that they thought things had been exaggerated. Not one out of 1,200 people. And the weird thing about the event was that as the picture came together, and as the dots were getting joined between the different briefings, and I was saying to people, look, remember, everything is connected to everything else. The sense of positive energy in the room actually went up and up and up. And it was really a sense that it was a relief to have it said. We know deep down that we're heading all in the wrong direction. We've got a crisis building up, and we're behaving like business as usual. And to have it said out loud, and to see that we get it, and that we all get it, dramatically improves our chances of being able to take action on this, proper commensurate action.
Mike, can I ask you, is this around the world? In all our countries, we often face significant changes to whether it's our economy or socioeconomic, and governments typically react because they know there's the will of the people and they want to make sure that they're popular and all the rest of it. Does climate change fit in this unique box that everybody says it doesn't matter what we do because we're going to blame everybody else? Because why else would you get the whole of the respected scientific community saying that the level of potential devastation and such consistent lack of will from a political perspective? I mean, it can't all be cost.
It's such an interesting question, isn't it? How can it, when the science has been so clear for so long, because it really has been. You know, I even remember as a teenager.
Unless you're in Washington, D.C.
I knew that it was a bit more distant then, but I knew we were on a path that was leading to trouble. I mean, the writing was on the walls then, you know, and I'm a long way from being a teenager. But that's such an interesting question. Why are we going in the wrong direction when the evidence has been so clear we need to change for so long? And there's two answers to that, really. One is disinformation. And that was a running thread through these briefings. And it's so important that actually we're going to produce a further briefing specifically on disinformation, because it's had such a central role in keeping us in trouble. And but the other way of answering this question, which is really central to it, is psychology, the human psychology of all of this. And we're going to put together a briefing specifically on the psychology. And when we ran this original briefing, we worked closely with the Climate Psychology Alliance and a wonderful lady in particular called Linda Aspey, who helped us a great deal to deliver this information in an uncompromising way, but in a way that was psychologically empowering and acceptable. What we were trying to do was to take away all the psychological defensive mechanisms that all of us have to some degree or other that stand between wherever we are now and action that is truly commensurate with the situation that we're in. And we wanted to make all those defensive mechanisms unwanted and unnecessary. And so that included, for example, getting everybody to feel comfortable in the room, getting everybody to feel that they weren't going to be attacked in any way, presenting really clear evidence, trying to create a sense in which people felt connected to other people, because nobody wants to feel like they're the only loony who's behaving differently. And that's really been holding us back. We all know it's going on, but we're all worried about talking as if it's going on because we're scared that we're going to somehow be the odd one out. And there's been this kind of collective inertia on that. And then the final thing is agency. We've all got to feel that there's something we can do on this that's meaningful. And so there was a clear call to agency on the day. And I was saying to people, look, step up. Either stand down from your job and let somebody stronger take it, or step up. And if you're feeling worried about this, don't worry, you're not alone. The whole room is full of people like you who are worrying about how to do this, but we're in it together. The point is we faced it together.
So I am intentionally playing devil's advocate because I'm absolutely
go.
Sometimes the disinformation is there's no point because developed nations are 20 years behind us and they're going to continue creating a negative impact on our environment, and therefore it doesn't matter what you do here in this little island of the United Kingdom, it doesn't matter. Now, clearly, if you dissipate that across all Western nations, then the net effect is exactly what the disinformation wants, I guess.
So, if you look at the disinformation around this, to start with, and the vested interests that have been working very hard and very cleverly for a long time to keep us from taking effective actions. One of the things I would love us to do is go straight from not accepting the existence of the problem to bouncing into a state of despair in which we say, well, there's nothing we can do. They would love that. And if you look at the psychology of this, here we are with our defensive mechanisms that are, holding us into business as usual, just carry on as usual. That's one of the storylines that gives us an excuse for not doing anything. But it doesn't stack up. The reality is there's plenty we can do. The UK is a very influential country. If it becomes an exemplar, it's big enough to be an exemplar for the whole of the world. If we start getting things right in this country, the rest of the world, we make it easier for everyone else to follow. absolutely plenty of agency that we can have. And even at the individual level, there is plenty of agency that we can all have, which would be good to move on and talk to, because the next chapter in the whole story is that we made a film of highlights of all the briefings, and it's presented by Chris Packham. And what he does is he gets members of the public and a few celebrities, Deborah Meaden's in there and Jennifer Saunders and a few others, but lots of members of the public, very different, diverse members of the public, watching the film with him in a sort of Gogglebox style, watching highlights of the briefings. And it's put together into a 50-minute film that we're calling the People's Emergency Briefing. And we're now screening that all over the UK, or people are hosting it all over the UK. And in fact, it's turning into an incredible phenomenon, a really incredible phenomenon. If you go onto nebriefing.org website, nebriefing.org, you'll find the screenings map. And it now contains over 1,600 screenings around the UK. Some of them have been, and most of them are still in the future. And the interesting thing is that every screening triggers on average, more than one additional new screening. So it's growing exponentially still.
Yeah, I saw a map of this, Mike, though. There's a lot of screenings around the world as well.
Yeah, they're even starting to take off around the world, and there are international franchises that are still embryonic, but they're growing. So this has potential to become an absolute international intervention, which is another evidence of, when you say, what can the UK do? Well, here's something that started off in the UK that can go out right around the world. And the call at these briefings, then it's not just a screening. We're only showing this film in face-to-face settings, and not just a screening of the film. What we're doing is we're having discussions with it. So there's a discussion guide for anyone who wants to host one of these films on how to give everybody who's watching it whatever it is that they need next. So there's, a chance for people to just share with their neighbors how they feel about it, a chance to connect with their neighbors, a chance to discuss it, there's chances to ask questions, to say how you're reacting. We can't deal with every question that comes up, but as far as possible, what we're trying to do is make sure that, when everyone finishes watching the film, everybody's in a different place. Some people are relieved that it's out there. Lots of people are relieved that it's been said, right? Because they know it, they feel it deep down. Some people are in shock. Some people are anxious. Some people just want more information. Everyone's in a different place. And as far as possible, we want to make sure that nobody leaves the room without getting whatever it is that they need next, or at least knowing where they can go to get it. So we give everyone a chance to to identify and express their emotional reaction to it. We get people a chance to have questions, give ideas. And on the website now, there is a link that says take action. And if you click on it, there is all kinds of resources. So first of all, there's some very tangible requests. So there's a request that you find out whether your MP has been to one of these briefings. And there's a very simple link that you can go on, and you can just tap in your postcode and it will tell you. And if they haven't, then ask them to come. And if they have, then say thanks for them to coming. And there's advice on how to talk to your MP and how you can meet them and how you can write to them and all that for people who are feeling nervous about it. And then there's a petition for you to sign yourself, calling for a televised national emergency briefing supported by the government across all the major TV channels. And that's a real stake in the ground that we want to happen. And there's growing support for that now, with many MPs have signed that petition.
Can I ask a question, Mike?
Yeah.
The film is rated 16 plus.
Yeah.
I believe. Which seems a real shame to me, because if anything gives me hope for things, it's...
So here is a subject of debate. Actually, the film's rated 12 plus.
It says 16 plus on your website.
I know. The film has been rated 12 plus. But what we've said on the website, and it's partly playing it safe, is we're not really advising it, generally speaking, to be shown to audiences under 16. And that is to protect the psychological health of young people. However, it's a mixed thing. We're not saying to responsible parents, don't take your younger children along. We are saying that's a good thing to do. If you can talk to your kids about this, that's great. What we don't want is situations where kids are turning up, maybe on their own, without any resources for this. We're being a little bit protective, I suppose. And then you could argue that we're playing it too safe, because we do our younger generations such a disservice not talking absolutely frankly about this situation to them, and how to create psychological health over this situation for our kids. It's to talk to them absolutely straight about it. It's to listen to them as well about it, and it's to role model the fact that these challenges can be looked at in the eye, and in doing so, we radically improve our chances of being able to deal with them. And that's how parents need to talk to their kids about all the difficult things in life.
I'm actually of the opinion that a lot of the time it's the other way around. If the children are given information, the parents will be inspired by the children.
I agree. A lot of the time when we hear people asking the question, how can I talk to or how should we talk to our children about this without devastating them? There's a bit of transference going on here. What they really mean is, I'm anxious about this, and I'm anxious about how I talk to my children about this.
Are there any plans to make like a child-friendly and the 9 areas or a little film or something like that? Because
we do have an educational group working on exactly that agenda right now. And next week, I'm talking to the Good Life Schools Project about all the fantastic work they're doing around creating critical thinking skills for schools, for school kids, and getting kids to think about what a good life looks like. And does it mean buying new trainers all the time and spending your time on social media? Or is it about the quality of your relationships and the quality of, and your contribution to society and all those sorts of things, and just getting kids to really do their own thinking about the world.
Are we reassigning against things like UN SDGs, Mike, in terms of looking at how to kind of reinvigorate that focus around climate as a broader part of that sustainability narrative?
It all very strongly interlinked. I mean, obviously, the Sustainable Development Goals, our failure to meet them is incredibly strongly linked to the climate and nature crisis. And it's worth mentioning a thing called the Inner Development Goals, which is a set of goals that were for an individual to try to develop. And they were put together by a bunch of academics and psychologists from an international group, pretty heavyweight group. And they were put together to try and answer the question, what leadership qualities do people need to develop in order to be enabling the world to meet the Sustainable Development Goals? And there's 22 of them, so they're quite it's a bit of a lengthy list in some ways, but there's some really good stuff in there. I recommend, anyone who wants to look these up, the Inner Development Goals, and I write about them a little bit in my most recent book. But they include things like courage, but also self-reflection, the ability to sort of live in the present, the ability to connect with other people, as well as a whole load of leadership skills that are much more standard and, all business leaders know that they need them already, but also kind of systemic thinking, joined up thinking, the kind of complex thinking where we solve complex problems by looking at the whole problem from a very multidisciplinary, joined up perspective. So all these things together, I recommend the Inner Development Goals, and it also includes a lot on critical thinking, of course.
Love that. Back on the psychologist perspective, where was the shift from the climate to now the climate and nature crisis? Because it feels to me that the nature crisis really resonates perhaps quicker with some folks than climate, and that's why I'm pushing back on the psychology aspect there.
It's not just a psychological trick to start talking about climate and nature. Where I got to that point was by, the more you look at climate, the more you see it as it's a symptom of something much bigger that's going on for humanity, right? We've become an incredibly powerful species, and we haven't yet got the care and wisdom to go with that power. And the result of that is that we are destroying the ecosystem. And one big symptom is climate, but there are symptoms all over the place. So nature breakdown is another big symptom. Toxic chemicals is another big symptom. I mean, plastic. We didn't do a briefing on plastic, but we're thinking we might do one in the future. It's coming at us from all angles. So it doesn't work to look at climate in isolation. It's climate and nature. And both of those things, if you look at, for example, the food system, it's climate breakdown and nature breakdown and toxic chemicals. All those things, together are contributing to, for example, our food insecurity.
So when we often talk about, when it comes to climate, we talk about once we get past a certain threshold, there's no return. Are you trying to remind people that there is a return and that actually actions now still have a potential to mitigate the impact of this?
Outright. So it's important to say things as I see them, as accurately as I can. This is where I think we're at. We don't know whether or not we've triggered something catastrophic that's going to be awful for humanity. We could have already triggered that in a way that we can't reverse. And if that happens, we don't know the extent to which we'll manage to find a way of coping with it, or the extent to which it will be totally devastating. We know that the risks of crossing those tipping points are going up and up and up all the time. We don't even know what all those tipping points are. We know about AMOC, the ocean currents I talked about, but we don't know about things like catastrophic collapse of glaciers causing tidal waves. We don't know about volcanic activity resulting from loss of weight of ice pressing down on the Arctic. There's all kinds of things we don't, we as humans, we like to think that we understand our situation better than we do. So we're absolutely playing with fire. As a result of that, we need to both mitigate and adapt. It's crystal clear that the need for adaptation is suddenly getting much, much higher. We see that in the extreme weather events. One piece of news since that initial emergency briefing is it looks very likely that we're going to get another El Nino in the autumn. In fact, it looks likely it's going to be a super El Nino. In fact, it looks likely that it might be the biggest El Nino that we've ever experienced since records began. And that comes on top of the warmest climate that we've ever had. So it looks pretty likely that we're going to, not definite, but pretty likely that we're going to experience around the world some of the most shocking weather we've ever had. Probably the most shocking weather we've ever had. Might not happen, but it might. And, it's the start, right? In my lifetime, in all our lifetimes, unless we die of something hideous and unexpected, we're going to experience even more serious stuff again. So this stuff is on the rise now. We have to adapt and we have to mitigate. But we have, the funny thing is, and why we're holding this briefing and why I'm, in some ways, it's the thing that makes me most optimistic about our response after, 20 years of banging on about this stuff along with many, many other people and seeing the world just accelerating into the problem. When are we going to get the big psychological, cultural change? The big tipping point? Well, this is one of the things that's giving me optimism because, a lot of people are getting very engaged with it and it is snowballing and it is creating a sense of, we need to wake up. And if we can wake up, we can change, we can create a situation in which when you walk down the street, you will actually see evidence that we're responding to an emergency, right? You will see scaffolding on the houses with where the retrofitting is going on everywhere. When you turn on the radio, you will hear talk about it. You won't hear a kind of implicit drip feed of news that kind of implies all the time that the appropriate response is to carry on as normal, which it emphatically isn't. We'll get this wake up, and when we get this wake up, and we all get it, actually it will feel fantastic.
Mike, you've been a beacon on this topic for ages. How do you keep so positive in spite of all the negativity around you? I mean, huge respect to you, but on a personal level, how do you manage to still find that optimism?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And I think some people really struggle with it. And some people at a sort of psychological level just find it less difficult. And I think I probably am somebody who finds it does trouble me sometimes, for sure. But it doesn't really weigh me down and drag me into depression. And why is that? Lots of reasons. We're thinking of putting a bit of advice of this on the NEB briefing website, actually. I think partly there are some things you can do that just physically keep you in psychologically better shape. It's good to take exercise. It's good to do things like meditation can be useful, for your frame of mind. I swim in cold water sometimes. Some people say that's a good thing. So there are some very basic physical things. It's good to have agency. It's really psychologically healthy to feel like you've got your sleeves rolled up and you're doing something that is meaningful and useful given the situation. I think that's very good for psychological health. And it's good to be connected to other people and talking to other people. So I would say to anybody, if this is troubling you don't let it trouble you on your own. Don't be lonely about this. Go and somehow find something. Go and look up People Planet Pint and go and find one of those meetings where you can just have a beer with somebody about it, talk to a neighbor, talk to your family, find a way of not being on your own about this. Go to an NE briefing, go to one of the People's Emergency Briefings, look them up on the screenings website and use that as an opportunity to connect with people who are in this space. And I think the final thing is maybe just how we think about it, how we frame it up. And we all have to have a way of keeping it in a perspective. And I think for me, for all the problems and whatever the future holds, it's still a beautiful world. I'm still glad to have been born. Whatever the future is for my kids, I'm still glad they've been born. I'm still glad they get the chance for the life they've got and the experiences they've got. And they have a chance to influence other people's experience of being alive as well. And all that's a good thing. And let's all work to make it as good for everybody as possible.
Hard to follow that, Matt. I love it. But it's a very human answer to something where we all feel is out of reach. And I think you've kind of restated the idea that it's not out of reach. Matt?
I get the whole worries about people finding it very hard to actually understand and then very hard to comprehend. I don't think we're at that point where it's got to be said anyway. And followed by what you're saying there, if you're finding it hard, speak to this person or do this or do that. And I can't get past the facts. And I'm the same with AI. And AI, why is nobody working with schools and why is nobody making education at the heart of this? And I'm the same with this. Surely a primary and secondary happy, friendly version of the film with accompanying briefs, because the kids, I look at everything and I think I've got more hope for that generation than my generation.
Yeah, sure.
Especially in this area, Mike, in this area, if you say to people, we're going to cut out meat because that's the answer, there's going to be a lot of pushback straight away. And I get that, I understand it. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. So it's...
Yeah. I mean, what do I think? I think, I don't want to be blasé about kids, but I think kids are usually more resilient than we sometimes think they're going to be, especially if we role model that it's okay, right? I'm thinking of the Harry Potter analogy, right? Is Voldemort something that can't be so bad, it's so scary it can't even be named? Or is it something we can talk about? Because when we can talk about it, we can deal with it, right?
I think we could make each of your speech skills the Horcrux or something, couldn't we? And, this is this Horcrux and this is this one. I don't know. I go back to the start of when you started talking about social media. I've written about social media about this week a bit, and basically democracy is run by social media and algorithms to a large extent now. And it feels like we have to address this. And with this as well, because kids will see TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and they'll see climate deniers, and the algorithms will feed them more of the same stuff, and they will grow up, if it's not properly, being deniers.
Kids need to get out of the grip of those algorithms, and they need to get out of the grip of nefarious billionaires who are influencing their lives in ways that are not in their interests. So if I was to, just suppose you were to ask me the question, what can I do as a primary school teacher? I think, even more than educate directly on the climate crisis, climate and nature emergency, which I would say do, I would say teach kids some basic stuff like critical thinking and to be able to make up their own mind about what a good life looks like. Teach them to be able to not be in need of micro dopamine hits from scrolling, doom scrolling and all the rest of it. Just teach them an altogether more real and sort of visceral way of living in which they have actual relationships. Yeah, actual relationships with humans and do things that involve concentration spans and roll their sleeves up and physically make contact with soil and stuff like that.
No argument here at all. I think the problem is the education system.
You brought us full circle there, Mike, because many of the challenges we've talked about during this season have been around how technology has an impact on young people and their perspectives of life, and the influence of social media and the risks of artificial intelligence and anthropomorphization, and the bigger picture of just seeing the truth in facts, but also recognizing that there's just a lot to be learned from stepping away from that and actually appreciating the environments and spaces that we're in. And so in many ways, the conversation around climate change and the nature crisis is interwoven in all the bigger conversations we have about a world that's becoming more technology heavy and a very small number of very wealthy people who influence the perspectives for their own gain of the majority. And if we care about the next generation and our obligation to preserve things, then how can you not have listened to this conversation and think, what's my place in that? Even if you feel small and you don't feel like you can make a change, we've seen on many occasions that many small voices can make a difference. So, but huge respect to you, the fact that, firstly, how you articulated, but also the decades of support and direction to keep pushing that message home. And obviously very grateful you've made time to come and talk to Matt and I, who you are pushing against an open door with us. But I'm very grateful that you are.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be on it. I guess we're sort of coming close to a close. Can I do it, just in case there's anybody listening to this who is wondering, well, what should I do next? Can I just give a quick...
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, so the very first thing is just go onto the nebriefing.org website and you'll find a screenings map, and go and find a screening near you and go and attend a screening. And then, maybe some people might want to host a screening, which is fantastic. We're looking for people to host a screening. There's also a petition to sign to ask for the government to put a televised national emergency briefing out. So there's all sorts you can do. And then go on to the Take Action link on the nebriefing.org website.
That's right.
And you'll find partner organizations that you can get involved in that are doing all kinds of things, that you might, want to do to actually help you take action. You will find links to further information that you can take. You will find just all kinds of resources for if you want to be somebody who's actually part of the solution. That website is a very good place to start.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you for sharing those.
Okay.
Again, thank you for joining us. Matt, anything you want to round up with?
No, I think that was a good ending, wasn't it, really? I'm just thinking, part of me wants to get the 9 people on mic and record an episode for each.
There's an ambition for season 3.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Start September with the 9 and then, but also then...
Well, the full briefings are on the website as well. You can listen to the full briefings. They're 10 minutes each. The original briefings, just go and download them.
It feels like put them into something. I don't mention AI because I know that's part of the problem, isn't it now? And in the data centre in the Scottish borders now, Mike, I don't know if you've seen that, plans for a massive data centre in the Scottish borders. Yeah. But I just think, creating summary reports and things about each one and sending it to schools. But I mean, you're preaching to the choir with me now with everything. So
some good food for thought for season 3. And you've definitely given us a spark there. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks,
Mike. I think on that basis, we'll wrap things up. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.